Hello and welcome into the Nittany Gritty podcast brought to you by the good folks at New Amendment. I am your host, Jon Sauber, joined once again and as always by former NBA player, current player in Greece for Athens, Tim Frazier. Tim, how you doing?
Good, man. How's it going, John?
Well, I'm going to be glued to my phone today. This is trade deadline day. Listen, as the outside of this, right? Like not the guy being traded. It's a lot of fun. I will stare at Twitter and beg for the Sixers to do things. It is one of my favorite pastimes on deadline day. I'm sure, though, from your perspective, this is not fun, right? Well, you at least don't have to worry about it now. I'm sure that's one of the advantages of playing overseas. But what is that like to be on deadline day, knowing like other people are excited too, right? Like people like me are like sitting there like all excited. How are you feeling during this day?
I just know during my times, in the NBA, around this time, it's very nerve wracking because you never know what's going on. You don't know the angle. Sometimes I felt like some years I felt, oh, I'm good, no worries, or I had a no trade clause or something like that was in there, that I was good, no worries. But this time can be very nerve wracking for a lot of people because we think it doesn't just affect the player, it affects families as well. We're telling families, hey, if I'm getting traded, we talk about coast to coast we speak on Mikal Bridges from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast. Now we're talking about moving over him and his family or, whoever he's with all the way up to the different coasts. If he has kids, that his kids have to find new schools or do they stay back? And it's just the fear of the unknown goes a long ways in these situations. I talked to you about it earlier. Just this time in free agency is one of the nervous times. Obviously, free agency is like, okay, you get to sign for all this money, but you don't. First off, you literally don't know the ball is not in your hands and you can't control it. Like even now, especially during a trade deadline, you really have no control. Like you could be doing everything right with your team. You could be playing the right way, or you could be coming off one of the best games of your career. But for, one of the higher ups, somebody comes asking and KD asks for a trade. You can eventually be put in there as bait or just to make the icing on the cake to get that trade done. You really have no control. So I know me personally, it's a nerve wracking around this, nerve wracking for me and my family around this time.
Yeah, and like, we talked about this pre-pod, but like TJ Warren did not request a trade from the Nets. Like, listen, he might be happy to go back to Phoenix. We don't know, right? Like he might be thrilled to go chase a title and everything, but he was not the one that wanted the trade from the Nets, right? It was KD, and he just got tagged along. And now he's going back to Phoenix, where he was, reportedly pretty desperate to get out of back in the day. So, yeah, man, listen, I like my job a lot, right? I like traveling and everything. I would not like having to uproot my entire life starting at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday or a Thursday, right? Like that is not fun. That does not sound like a good time. But it's wild. Like I said, I enjoy it a lot. And as I've gotten older, I've tried to understand hey, these are people who are getting their lives uprooted. But at the end of the day, I'm also sitting on the trade machine until 3 a.m. trying to figure out ways to get Mikal Bridges rerouted back to Philadelphia where he's from. I'm sure that would make him happy. I'll justify it that way, right? He's from Philly. That's what he wants. I'm doing him a solid by making all those fake trades. But it was wild. Like the KD trade broke last night as I was driving home from the Bryce Jordan Center covering the Penn State Wisconsin game last night. And man, what a whirlwind of feelings about the sport of basketball in that 4 hours, right? One of the most exciting trades that you'll see in season NBA history. That came right after I don't want to say brutal, but a not fun game to watch, right? It was kind of plodding and it lacked some juice to it. This is probably as good a time as ever to get into the X's and O's of what happened there. The last two games for Penn State have been, I feel like saying disastrous is hyperbole, but they kind of have been disastrous, right? From an NCAA tournament perspective, losing on the road at Nebraska, a game that they should have won because they're more talented than that team. And we talk about the road wins, but we also pointed to that one all season as that's how you make up for it. You beat Nebraska, you beat Minnesota. Minnesota's still coming up, of course. We talked about last week, you got to win your home games, right? Wisconsin's a beatable team. We thought they should go 2-0 in that stretch. They went 0-2, and now it feels like everything's been turned upside down on this team.
Yeah, it's tough, and I know they have to be feeling it, and I think and we've talked about from the beginning how big of a the deal for them to go 2-0, because obviously we have the aspirations, like that we assume they do, to become NCAA tournament team. And to drop these two when you really need those two to really, keep yourself in the hunt. The last time I had looked, I think last week we were first 4 out, or, we were close, in the bubble, first 4 in, first 4 out. And if you look back in the last week or two and making a tournament in an early projection of the bracket. And now it's no way, and me personally, to see that we're still there. Those are 2 bad losses that we needed to win to really keep ourselves on track to solidify ourselves in and to make an NCAA tournament bid. Do I think it's over? No, I don't think it's over. I think you still have sort of how many 7 more games left, maybe 6 or 7 more games left in the Big Ten, and and as we've seen, anything can happen. As far as knocking off teams, getting big wins, and just taking care of business. It's hard to say, hey, we want this Penn State team to go 7-0 right now, then get into the Big Ten tournament. Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? Probably not. But something's going to have to change, and for them to continue these aspirations of making the tournament, they have to step up in a big way. And I think it's not just 1 guy or 2 guys that we need to step up, or the freshmen to step up. We need literally everybody to step up, because as you can see, these last 2 games, as you would say, were just asterisks, because from top to bottom, from everybody. Yeah, we might have had a player that played well, but it didn't impact the game enough for them to win.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point, and that it's not over. And I will dive into that a little more later, because I think that is a really good point, that it's not, the door is not closed, I think is the best way to put it. But these last 2 were like, man, watching that Nebraska game, it never felt like Penn State was going to win it. And I know that's like a silly thing to say, right? I'm sitting at home watching it, but like it really did feel like that every time they tried to punch back, that Nebraska pulled away, right? Nothing they could do was kind of going to go right. And some of it is effort defensively, right? But some of it is like Tominaga is not going to score 30 a game, and I can prove that by the fact that he averages 10 a game. Right. Like, it is just not a thing that happens. And he was lighting them up. And it was like they were contested shots. Like, if you'd contested it more, you would have fouled him. Right. Like, that was the bottom line. And he was making them. And you just kind of have to eat it in those situations. But I think there was something that happened that was really interesting between the 2 games. So we had our weekly media availability on Monday with Micah, and Jalen Pickett was also available. And man, this was the most dejected I've seen Micah in the year plus, almost 2 years that he's been at Penn State. There was no opening statement, which is not a thing that usually happens.
Right.
There was no. He was a little more brief with his answers. At one point, I asked him, like, we were about, so it's usually 20 minutes of availability, and about 10 minutes in, like, we had asked like 8 questions already, right? Like, me and the other reporters, like, and that's far more. That's usually a full presser, right? Like, that's not usually 10 minutes in, and he'll give us long, good answers. But he was like, I just asked him, was like, how are you feeling, right? Like, because it was very, very clear that he was not what we're used to seeing, at least, right? I don't want to say not himself, because I don't want to speak for him, but he was not what we were used to seeing. And he talked about his focus on Wisconsin and everything, and how he wanted to, to hone in on that. But I noticed something was kind of off there. And then, and he didn't necessarily agree with what I'm about to say, but I still, I saw it, like, it's what I saw. At the game last night against Wisconsin, he did not seem as demonstrative as usual in the first half. He did not seem as, and this was the phrasing he disagreed with. I asked if he was not as into it. He said he was, but like, it just seemed like he was not as engaging, maybe is the better word for it, during the first half of the game. And then there was a point in the second half, about halfway through, where Andrew Funk, as he has all season, got grabbed off the ball and they didn't call it, and he kind of got into it with the refs, and then he started to be more engaged with the game, more encouraging. I would like the moments I could point to, like, there was a big 3 that was made by Penn State. I think it was halfway through the first half, or maybe it was halfway before the Funk thing happened in the second half, where Micah just kind of didn't react and had his arms crossed, right? And that's kind of not been him this year. And they made a shot at the buzzer, or just before the buzzer, to end the first half, and there was no, like, it didn't bring any juice, right? Like, it was he just wasn't as like I said, as demonstrative. And I thought that was noticeable, and I thought it was notable too, because the team kind of followed that in the first half. They lacked some of the energy, but when I thought they picked it up is when he picked it up, engagement wise. And I thought they really did a good job of responding. And you have to respond in those moments. And I thought he kind of seemed like himself again in the second part of the second half and in overtime. But I couldn't shake this idea. And that's why I asked him about it as the first question of the press conference, because I was curious post game. I asked him about like, was he just not as into it? Like, what was going on? And he said, no, he was into it. He didn't notice any changes, or anything like that. But to me, like that, he was kind of a mirror of the energy. Like the team didn't have the energy in the first half. And I wonder if that was because maybe he didn't have the energy or what was going, because the crowd, as you know, Bryce Jordan Center, Wednesday night, 2 losses in a row, it ain't going to be great. And like, so like the energy kind of was lacking last night. And I think that sort of all parties were responsible for that.
Yeah, I agree. You know, it's all parties are definitely responsible, but I do put some of that on some of the other players as well. You know what I mean? Because we are all human, and it is hard to, you know, bring it every day. You know, obviously the best bring it every day, and not saying that Micah didn't bring it, but it was noticeable for us to see that it wasn't the same as the previous 2 games. You know, Purdue and Nebraska, and we could see that, and I put that on as a players because, as we talk about this in basketball, it's always about the next man mentality. If coach is not at 100 and he's at 90, you know, or he's at 85, you know, we need somebody else to help pick it. Lundy, Dredd, somebody needs to help pick that up and change that around, because as you said, and you could see later on, he was able to pick it up. Something had to happen, and I think that is needed throughout from everybody. It was great that you brought this up, because it's not just a coach, him not having that injury, that energy, because you talk about Pickett as well. You know, Pickett has some questionable shots, and he missed some bunnies that he really usually makes, and he needs somebody else to pick him up. And it's a chain effect that goes all the way down the line. When Funk's not making shots, somebody has to pick him up, and Dredd as well, and Lundy as well. We need everybody to continue to pick each other up and bring the energy and bring the juice. So, you know, for Coach to not be at his best, which, you know, it's hard to really tell that, because sometimes, you know, coaches go into what I've learned, and coaches go into different games with different mentalities, as far as like, hey, you know what I mean, maybe, you know, this isn't for the rah-rah to here is not needed. You know what I mean? The players need to be able to, you know, get themselves together, because obviously you and I both don't know what was said before the game or, you know, leading up to the game as well. But as far as the energy standpoint, you know, a coach can't make you bring energy. You know what I mean? That's something that a player has to be able to do. It has to go in every night and say, hey, you know, I'm stepping in the line and I want to win. So I'm going to do whatever I need to do to win. So I'm going to bring the energy that I need. And like you said, you didn't see that. And you see it towards the end of the game. And now we see, you know, it starts to come because the game's on the line, because they knew they needed to win that game, and they felt like they needed to win. So it's like, okay, now we're just getting crunch time and we're not winning like we're supposed to be winning. And, you know, you saw it start to pick up.
Yeah, and I think, like, you know, I agree with a lot of what you said, and I think I you know, maybe some people would take it as a criticism that I don't think he was energetic, but I like it's part of what makes Micah who he is, right? We talked about this. He's really genuine, and like, I don't know, I appreciate someone that, listen, we all have bad days at work, right?
Right.
Like there are plenty of days where I'm sitting staring at my laptop for 4 hours and I've got like 20 words and I'm like, this is not good. Like, this is not productive. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say he wasn't productive or wasn't helping, but again, like, you're right. He's human, right? Like, we all have days, and whether he had a day like that or not, like, and again, he disagreed with that, which he's, you know, more than allowed to do. Right. But it is important, you're right, that the players then make up for that energy. Yep. And it's not always a great thing to just be a mirror of the coach, right? Because if the coach is frustrated, sometimes that can bleed into the play and everything. There was another moment that I thought was notable late in the game where Micah was, we couldn't hear what he was saying, obviously, up in press row. But he was saying something to Andrew Funk, and then Funk kind of got like visibly frustrated on the court. It might have been, it was a coach, I should say. Like, I believe it was Micah, but it could have been another coach that was also saying something to him. And like, I think that's just, it's, again, not a criticism of any parties involved. I think it's a good indication of the frustration levels, maybe, of where they're at and what's happening, right? Because they've lost 3 in a row for a team that internally expected to make the NCAA tournament, right? And as you and I talked about, and I've talked about all season, that was a reasonable expectation. So I wonder if some guys are feeling that pressure. And Micah talked about in the press conference on Monday, you know, he said he'll be head coach next year, right? Like, this is not the end of basketball for him. Some of these guys it is the end of basketball, and that will be it, right? Like maybe you play overseas, maybe you get a cup of coffee in the G League or in the NBA, whatever. But like for a lot of these guys and these guys that are graduating, this is it. And he said that as kind of a way to be like, you need to act like this is it, right? And I wonder if that is kind of manifested in some like pressure on guys' shoulders that maybe, I'm sure it can help, right? But at times, I'm sure when things are going badly, it can amplify the negative. But I thought it was really interesting to see. I will say that it didn't feel as much like a backbreaker as maybe it could have last night, right? Like losing to Wisconsin because of the way they handled the second half of the second half and overtime, and because of the way they responded. Yes, it has to suck for them that they lost when they managed to come back, push it into overtime, and like, Pickett fouls out, but by then it's kind of already over anyways. And like, you're kind of feeling like, I understand feeling down and everything after a game that you had a chance to win that could have like righted the ship, but it did not feel like the kind of loss to me that it could have been, right? Like if they go in there and get their doors blown off and lose by 20, then it's like, you and I are having a very different conversation, and it's probably happening later in the day because I'm probably writing a very long story right now about how much of a disaster things are, right? That isn't the case, right? Like it's not what happened. It's not good, right? Like things, I'm not going to, we're not sunshine and rainbows here. Like it is not good right now. They have lost 3 in a row for a team that should be good enough and is talented enough and has a good enough coach to make the NCAA tournament. And right now they're not even close to that position. And I'll be curious to see how they respond because I don't know. I think it is easier to come back from that type of loss last night than, like I said, the one where it's a blowout and it's like, well, shit, it's over.
Right. But you did mention a lot of it about the pressure that's coming with this. And I think, like you said, this is a team full of seniors with high expectations, and the pressure is coming, and the pressure is filled. And I know with Micah, he feels it. Everybody's feeling this pressure because this team is supposed to be an NCAA tournament team. And I know, and I both have spoke about how Micah is as a person, and I know he's going to feel like if they don't achieve that, there is some failure in this season. So I know the pressure is there, and you don't want to, you don't want to lose these 3 games in a row. You're going to look back on that, just like we said earlier about the loss to Michigan State, or earlier in the year. We're going to say, hopefully we don't look back on that, or the first loss to Wisconsin. We're going to look back on that and be like, man, damn, that's what's keeping us out of the tournament. And I know these 2 back-to-back losses after the Purdue game, which Purdue was number 1 at the time, is gonna hurt, because if that's what's gonna stop the team from being able to make the NCAA tournament, they're gonna look back on it and say, hey, we let one get away from us from achieving our goal. So the pressure's there, and I think that when the pressure's there, everybody gets tense and tight. And right now, they need something to happen as far as somebody, a player, a coach, whatever, someday somebody to be able to step up and right the ship to get back to rolling and get back to doing the things that you're supposed to do. Because at the end of the day, like what I've learned and what I know just playing in my career, that man, this is a game of basketball. It's great. It's it's you have to go out there and you have to have fun. You put all this pressure on yourself, worried about trade deadlines, how many points I'm going to do, if I'm going to be here and do that, and it'll take away from the joy of what you're doing, because it is special. You're a select few. Select few guys that are able to play and put the Penn State uniform on and play for your school, play for yourself, and continue to achieve and go for your dreams. So, man, the fun has to get back, and I think you see that a little bit, that the fun wasn't there, and it was more so like, hey, we have to do this. So they're putting a lot on top of their shoulders to be like, hey, when they're looking at themselves like, we're not playing the best, but we're down, but we got to fight back. And that's what you said about being able to right this ship from the last game, because actually they were able to come back and fight, send the game into overtime. And it's basically saying, hey, man, we got maybe some of that stuff off our back, to knowing that, hey, we still are a good team. We can still do what we need to do. But right now it has to be a meeting in between the guys that are in that locker room to understand, like, hey, man, we still have 7 conference games to go, and we gotta do some things that a lot of people think that we're not going to be able to do, but we can do it if we put our minds together.
Yeah, and I think there are positives to take from those last 2 games, especially too, right? Like, and one of the things, and I don't think we've probably talked about enough, because I don't think really anyone's talking about enough, but Seth Lundy's been awesome this year, right? Like you talk, everyone, like Pickett gets the attention, and for good reason. Seth Lundy has been their most consistent player. Like outside of one game, I think it was Wisconsin on the road, maybe it might have been Rutgers, but like he like kind of no-showed. He's been incredible, and like last night that was the case again. He hits the game-tying 3, with less than 30 seconds on the clock over a contest from a defender, like fading away on the wing. Like he did not have room to shoot that shot, and he made it. He's been incredible on both ends of the court. And Keba Jai, by the way, too, someone we said was young and developing and needed time, has looked good the last 2 games, right? Like it seems like something is kind of flipped there. And like, so I don't want to be all doom and gloom. There are positives. It's just really hard to talk about those things when it's in the middle of 3 losses, right? Like it's a tough situation, and it's not where they wanted to be, right? And I think that matters quite a bit. But this is a good time to get into the scouting report of what's to come, because what's to come is really, really important. First up, game against Maryland on the road Saturday. Maryland has not lost at home in conference play this season. And then they followed up by taking on Illinois at home, a team they've already beat when they did it on the road. So like you would think they have a chance there. And this is why, and we can get into the deeper conversation, which you brought up earlier now. This is why I don't think it's time to completely slam the door shut. Right. Like this is why I think, because so I'm writing the story, little inside baseball for everyone last night. I'm writing my story. Right. It was just a 5 takeaway story because it was like there wasn't a ton going on. The last takeaway was like that the season's on the brink, and like I'm finishing the takeaway and I'm writing like, well, the reason that it's on the brink is because they have all of these tough matchups. And then you look at the schedule and it's like, well, I mean, yeah, Maryland's tough, but like Maryland has like no great shooting and like are susceptible to teams that can light it up from beyond the arc. It's like, all right, well then Illinois is like, well, they already beat Illinois. It's like, okay, Minnesota, it's a road game, but like Minnesota's pretty bad. It's like, all right, well then you have Ohio State on the road. It's like, well, Ohio State's been terrible too. And then, Rutgers, like, oh, well, that's a home game. Rutgers just lost Mawot Mag for the year to torn ACL, which you hate to see. Then you get Northwestern on the road, and then Maryland again at home. It's like you pointed all of those. It's like, they could feasibly win any of those games, right? Like on an individual basis. And that's what makes these next 2 so important, right? Because when you can look at the schedule, and again, I feel like we've been fairly doom and gloom so far. And for me to look at the schedule and be like, oh, but it's probably not over yet. Like it's a good sign, right? Like it shows that you still have a chance. They play like they did in the first half last night. They play like they did against Nebraska. They don't have a chance. But if they can get back to what they were doing, playing how they were playing, they got to focus. And again, it's their job to focus one game at a time. I get that. But it is not over. It is tenuous right now, to say the least, right? Like things are not in a good spot, but it is not completely over. And I think that's really important, right? Because if they go into Maryland and win, it changes everything. I don't think they're going to win against Maryland, and that's important to say too. But they have a chance. And right now it's a projected 7-point loss to Maryland, according to Ken Palm. That is the only game with a projected margin of 5 or greater for Penn State the rest of the year, whether it's a win or a loss, right? Like everything is projected to be that tight. And it is, it's probably not going to feel good if they lose against Maryland, because if they lose against Maryland, then they're on a 4-game losing streak heading back home to face Illinois. Yeah. But like the world has not ended. The season is not completely over. Yes, it is. Like I said, it's in a very bad place, but this is a Maryland team that's gettable. Like I said, not a bunch of great shooters. Dante Scott's really good. Julian Moore's really good. Like this is or Julian Reese, he's really good. This is a good team, but it is susceptible. Jameer Young's been their leading scorer all year. It's been great off the dribble, attacking the rim. But like this is, again, if you look stylistically, like I don't want to be the guy that talks themselves into like Penn State's going to win every game. But like you look at that game and it's like, all right, well, they might catch them. It's noon on a Saturday. You know who likes playing games at noon on a Saturday? Nobody, because I don't like covering them. So I damn well know nobody likes playing them. So like you're going to be able to catch some people off guard. I don't know, man. Like every time I want to like, pat the grave, put the final nail in the coffin, it's like, man, the door really is just cracked ajar enough that if they can push through it, that things could change quickly.
Yeah, and as cliche as it might sound, you have to believe, and that team has to believe. I know coach is going to come in there and have his team prepared. They just have to believe, because you've seen wilder things happen. Who says that they can't go to win the next 7 or 6 out of 7 or 5 out of 7? Like you said, these games are all winnable. They're going to be tough. Like they're all winnable for sure. And it's nobody you're sitting there just like, you're facing, Purdue at Purdue, which is at the number 1 team in the country. None of these teams are somebody that you're like, I don't know if we're going in there like it's going to be tough. Like we're going to have to play A+ basketball to win. All these teams and games are winnable just by playing the way that Penn State can play. If they play the way they can play, if they shoot how they shot against Michigan, if they play how they played against Illinois the first time, we talk about them. They can easily run off these next 7 or 5 out of 7 or whatever's necessary. And I think that gives you enough. It's just the belief of being able to have a positive record out of these next 7 and going into the tournament playing the right way of basketball and the best basketball that they can go into the Big Ten tournament. And if you could do that, I still think that people believe outside, the guys that are going to have the votes, they still believe that Penn State is a tournament team just off the guys that we have with Pickett getting all the attention that he has with Coach, what he's done and just all the supporting cast. People believe that this is an NCAA team. They just have to be able to show it and put the wins together for it to be not a debate. You know what I mean? Because I think if it comes down to it and there's a debate against, somebody else in Penn State, the other team, school that's been there the most is probably going to get that edge over Penn State because, the track record of Penn State is that we don't make the NCAA tournament. And that'll go. And that's going to happen. And that's how it's going to be. But I believe it, man. I do believe they can turn it around. Obviously, you need everybody to take up another notch. You need pick, like it's hard to ask, but you're telling Pickett, hey, you have to pick it up. You have to do more. Obviously, you do a lot and you're getting all the recognition of, one of the best players in the country. But in order for you to take this team to the next spot, you got to do more. You have to look in the mirror and say, hey, I got to be better. Lundy, Funk, everybody, Dredd, Ajay, everybody from top to bottom, Winter, they have to look in the mirror and as men and understand like, hey, man, I have to do more than what I'm doing now. Because what I'm doing now, yeah, it's okay. Well, we win one, lose one. We beat Michigan, we beat Illinois, but then we lose to Wisconsin, lose to Nebraska. And if that's the way we want to keep going, then we have to take those aspirations of the NCAA tournament out the door. But if we do want to achieve something that's very, very special and it's something that, most Penn State teams don't get a chance to do, I don't know, when was the last time? Was in 2011, my year?
11,
when I was there, if you take away, obviously, the great things that team that with the COVID year weren't able to make it, but obviously they were going to make it and do some damage. If you want to achieve something special, you have to look in the mirror first and you have to go in and say, hey, man, it should have started last night after the game. We got to get better. We sit in the locker room. What do we want to do? And I've been on teams where I've had, we've had these meetings, we lose a couple, we sit there like, and, obviously the leader or somebody, not even the leader, somebody steps up and it's like, hey, what are we doing? What is our goal? Are we here just to be here? Are we just, having fun, just this, or do we have an end goal? And what do we need to do as a group, not as an individual, but as a group to be able to get to that goal that we need to do? And hopefully that was called last night because I do think the door's not closed, but it's creaking to being able to being closed. And something needs to be changed. Somebody needs to step up. Some meeting needs to be called. And they have to get back to having fun in the game of basketball, but as well be on top of their P's and Q's and understand what you have ahead of you. We have 7 games to be able to right this ship and achieve something that Penn State programs aren't able or don't usually do. And the time is now. And it's not tomorrow. It's not later on down the road. It's time is now to be able to fix that and get head in the right direction.
Yeah, and to the players' credit, and usually the door to the practice gym is open on the way out, and that's the door I walk out to go to the media parking lot. Usually that door is open. You can see some guys working in there. That music was loud. The doors were closed and the music was loud. I'm going to bet there were quite a few guys in there working after the game was over, which I think for the program is a positive sign and something that you want to see. But yeah, I think and you're right, the time is now, right? They have to change it. And that starts with Maryland. As like I said, I don't think that's a game they're going to win, but if they go out and do it, everything changes so quickly. Everything drastically shifts, right? You suddenly you're back to where you were, to where you don't have a margin for error. You're back to where you were after Nebraska, right? That's where you don't have a margin for error, but it's still attainable because you just got to win your home games and beat Minnesota on the road. So essentially, they got to steal 2 on the road now, right? It is. That's where the math is on the season, or they have to go on a deep run into the Big Ten tournament, which they could. I'm not rolling that out either, but I think this is they have to make that shift, and I think this is we can dive into the word on campus here. The NCAA tournament is not the end game for most programs. I think for this one, it has become that. And like, I think they really need it right now, right? Like this program really needs to make the NCAA tournament this year, because there is more to this. As we talked about this last week, right? Like so many of these guys are gone. They desperately need to do something before it turns over to the young guys or another group of transfers, maybe, right? Like another group of transfers that are trying to get the job done. But like, this is not the time to wilt. It is not the time to, like you said, like to just like go home and give up and call it a year. Because as Mike has said, like this is it for a lot of these guys. And like, Miles Dredd didn't play until there were 4 minutes left in the first half last night, by the way. Like that's a message sent as far as I'm concerned, right? Like it is not, I don't think that's a coincidence. Micah got asked about it after the game and he said that it was his decision. There was no, like, I think it's pretty clear, right? That a message was sent on some level there. And so like the situation should be dire from the standpoint of like, this needs to be a year where they get the job done with this. Because by the way, if it gets worse, they're not on the NCAA tournament bubble. They're in the NIT bubble. And like, you don't know if you're getting into the NIT after what we saw early in the season. That's actual disaster, right? Like that is as bad as it gets, and like on the precipice of everything falling apart. But yeah, like they are not that far out of it, right? The Big Ten is a mess right now. It's a fun mess. I'm very much enjoying watching it from night to night. But like they're 3 games out of second place. 3 games out. Like it is not that far off. And I believe as of right now, Michigan is in second place, which I got to tell you is not a thing that I saw coming. And I don't think anyone saw coming. Yeah, Michigan, Rutgers, and Indiana all tied for second place, 8-5 in the conference. By the way, Penn State has beaten both Michigan and Indiana this year. And they have a chance to knock off Rutgers in the Bryce Jordan Center later. Next up in the conference, Illinois, who they've also beaten. Then you get to Northwestern, who they haven't played yet. And then Iowa, who they've beaten. So, like, this is not this insurmountable task ahead, right? Like you said, I think you put it well. They're not playing Purdue. And it's funny, I could see you like searching for another team to say with that. It's because there is no other team. It's Purdue, right? Like it's the only team that scares you the rest of the way. Like it's only Purdue, and they got those 2 out of the way, and maybe they have to face them in the Big Ten tournament if things go poorly. But yeah, like I said, when I was writing that story last night, I was looking for the like, okay, they're too far out of it. It's kind of impossible. And then you just look at it like, no, they're not. Like they win last night, by the way, and things are, and this is why I think they're probably pretty dejected, rightfully so. They had a real shot to like completely flip it all, right? Like to be in a really, really good spot. 5-8 in the conference is not great, of course. Like I'm not going to pretend it is. But again, it's also 3 games back from second place because the conference is such a jumbled mess. And they get to face teams 13 and 14 each this year, or the rest of the year. Both of them on the road. So again, there's your chances for 2 losses to pick up or wins to pick up on the road against Ohio State and Minnesota. And like, yeah, like every time I want to pat the grave, like you take the step back and be like, am I evaluating this properly? Because that's part of my job, right? Is evaluating this and making sure that I'm looking with a clear head. I'm the objective observer here, right? Like I'm to call it down the middle. Every time you take a step back, it's like, yeah, things are going bad, but they're not that far off from turning it around pretty quickly. And so like they need to have the mentality too of like, yes, this has sucked. We have not buried ourselves. We still have a chance to make up for these mistakes that we've made. And like I said, if they go in and beat Maryland, everything changes. Or if they just go 1-1 this next stretch, like they're still in a perfectly fine spot, which is, I don't know, man. I don't know if I've ever said that about a team that was 5-8 in the Big Ten and lost 3 in a row, including 1 to Nebraska, right? Like it's just a weird year. Like, and sometimes shit gets weird. And this year, shit's getting weird.
Yeah, on a side note, you talking about you love this year, how the teams are just beating up. I don't like it, man. I don't like it. I want the powerhouses back. I used to, like, I need these powerhouse teams. Like, you look at it, I'm looking at it, like, when's the last time Ohio State was been that far down? Or, Michigan State as well, and the Michigans, and, what I mean? Or it was always a jumble at the top, and yeah, you might have some guys at the bottom. There was always a jumble at the top because, like, we mentioned it last week. And like we had so many opportunities to knock off when I was playing, to knock off top 25 teams. Like we were playing them every other week. You had somebody that was a top 25 team, and with this year with the Big Ten conference, like I'm not saying the conference is down. I just think that it's just maybe we just beating up on each other too much because you look at the Purdue's 11-2, everybody else is 11-2 in the conference and 22 everybody 22-2 and throughout the season, but everybody else is on a close to almost 10 losses. You know what I mean? Usually, you know what I mean, somebody's at 5, maybe it's 6, a couple 3-loss teams, and you're ready for those big, like, you know, we don't have any in the Big Ten right now, the clashes where we're sitting there like, okay, number 1 versus number 3. Like, we're not getting any of that. I don't know how I personally feel about that, because I love that. I love that. Even when Penn State wasn't one of those teams, but I'm sitting there like, okay, Ohio State versus Michigan, top 10 battle. You know, you gear up and you're ready to watch it, because you're watching these potential and more than likely pros go against each other at a high stake. You know, I mean, with high rankings, and they mean so much more. And I hate to say it, we're not getting that this year in the Big Ten. Yeah, we're getting great battles and guys are battling against each other. And like you said, it's tied basically from 2 to 6 all the way down 2 to 7 as far as the standings go. But you know, there's no real battles that, you know, that I'm used to witnessing as far as the Big Ten goes.
Yeah, and that's a good point. My counter would be that I think the conference is as good as it's ever been. There are 7 teams in the top 34. Yeah, there are 7 teams in the top 34 in KenPom. 7. Mm-hmm. Like, that's 20% of the best teams in the country are Big Ten teams. I think part of it is they're just beating up on each other. Yeah. And like the rest of the conference is not far down from that 34 mark, by the way. Oh, and one more note, number 34 is that Ohio State team that's really struggling. They're just getting really unlucky. Sometimes that happens, you know, like it's crazy. It is. And that is, I think that's the beauty of the Big Ten. By the way, when I say beauty, I don't mean play style, right? Like, please play like 5 out or at least 4 out. Stop playing too big. Like, this is a plea to the entire conference. This is why I enjoy watching Penn State play basketball under Micah Shrewsbury. I don't have to watch usually 2 non-shooters on the court at the same time. I hate it. That I hate. I will stand by that to the day I die. And the officiating, we've talked about that plenty, but I don't need to go on that tirade again. I think it needs to improve from all aspects. But like, there are really good teams in this conference that like they're going to end up getting. You know, I know you said they have 8 in right now, according to Mike DeCourcy. Like, they get 8 in, they get 9 in, they get 10 in. How many of those teams are in the Sweet 16? 3, 4? Mm-hmm. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there are really good teams. You know, Rutgers is going to get hurt losing Mowat Mag. Like I said, you don't want to see something like that ever tearing his ACL. Awful, especially this late in the year. You know what I mean? He was having a good year, helping them be the second best defense in the country, which, let me say that one more time to anyone who is like still reckoning with Penn State scoring 45 at Rutgers. It's the second best defense in the country. I don't want to double back that far, but I know this is still a point of consternation for some people. Yeah, I just think like it's fun when teams are good and beating up on each other. I would agree with you. Like, if it's bad basketball, like, I'm not as interested in it. But I think generally it's been better. Again, I would just more shooting on the court at all times, please, for my sake.
Yeah. You know, the game should be, they should be trending toward the NBA. We want more threes and more dunks. Isn't that what everybody wants to see? Maybe we'll get more people in the stands if we shoot more threes and more dunks. No, but at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing for college, and, this is a little off topic and a little off subject, is that, the guys have to learn how to play the right way. I think that benefited me. Yeah. As far as, my professional career of just knowing how to play the right way, and I think in a lot of instances where we see guys that are great college players don't really have, I don't want to say not, obviously the dream is to make it to the NBA, but not really pan out or have longer careers in the NBA is because of just the not learning how to play the correct way. They only know one way, which is ISO basketball. And that hurts a lot because, once you get to the NBA, now you're one of the lowest on the totem pole. Once again, it's like going into college. You go in and you're as a freshman and you have to look up to those seniors. And once you become a pro, you become a rookie and you're carrying bags and getting donuts for everybody, before, until you're all-stars. And that's what happens. Obviously, a little off topic, but, as long as guys are learning how to play the right way, I think the game is going to be in good hands. But obviously, you want to see things that are more fun to get people into the seats. And you want to see, as I mentioned, the top 10 clashes of, hey, number 1 versus number 3 or number 1 versus number 5, because obviously that brings a lot of attention to the program, and it's good basketball to see pros go against pros. And for our case, a lot of it, especially in the Big Ten, is a lot of rivalries. You see a lot of rivalries where, there are top 10 teams going against each other.
Yeah. And I think the point you bring up is a good one, right? Like, ISO ball can't be it, right? Like, and even in the NBA, like, it's not it, like in the playoffs, you get to a little more like teams just run pick and roll to the death. to to their death till they get the matchup they want. And like this is also part of what I really appreciated last night with Penn State. Connor Segan for Wisconsin is undersized. They kept having Funk set a ball screen for Pickett, getting a Segan switched onto Pickett, and Pickett would attack and try and finish around the rim, right? Like now some of those shots didn't fall. Like that is tough, right? Like he had an off night. He was 8 of 19 from the floor. Not what you want to see, but I think that's part of the modern basketball that Mike is bringing, right? Like he saw a matchup that he wanted to go after, so they just kept going after it. And they went after it time and time again. And I thought their overtime shot chart, I was looking at it after I'd finished my story last night, and like it's a thing of beauty. It's a thing of analytical beauty, I should say. So it's a thing of beauty to me. There were only shots like in the semicircle and from three. Like that was it. Those were the only shots they took. Now they didn't fall, like they just got cooled from deep in overtime, which sucks for them. But like it is like, oh yeah, this is like the perfect shot chart. And like it's funny if you compare the first half, there were a lot more like 18-footers mixed in there when the offense wasn't playing well. In the second half, it started to look more like overtime when they started to, you know what I mean, really get the most high efficiency shots possible, which I think is like going to be a positive with this program as long as Micah Shrewsbury's there. They're going to prioritize efficiency. They're going to prioritize scoring as many points as quickly as they can, and that is by targeting those high efficiency shots. So I think like, you know, this has been fairly doom and gloomy, right? Like it hasn't been fun it's not been a fun conversation, I'm sure, but like it's a necessary one. But I do think there is still reason to believe in this team. I don't think like it's all dead. Could be in a week. Like no way around that. It might be dead in a week. But like right now, like it's still all out there. We've seen plenty of teams in the past. Like I've been following college basketball for a long time. This is my 5th year covering a Big Ten team. I would like to cover the NCAA tournament at some point. I covered an Indiana team that didn't make it. Now 4 years covering Penn State and them not making it. I would like to cover an NCAA tournament. But we've seen plenty of teams suck in late January and early February, and then mid-February turn it around, go on a run, they make the tournament. It happens every year. Penn State could be that team. They also could finish 5-15 in Big Ten play. I'm not going to roll that out either. Like it is. This is going to be an inflection point. We talk about it. There are a lot of them throughout a season. This could be one of them, and it probably will be one of them. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. I am eager to see how Saturday plays out. I think it's going to be a big-time response opportunity. But I think that's a good place to leave it this week.
Yeah.
You can, of course, follow Tim and I on Twitter. Tim Frazier 23, me at Jon Sauber. You can find this podcast wherever you're currently listening to it, or if you're watching it on YouTube, on YouTube it's Beyond Big Ten, 10 written out 10. On Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, at Beyond the Big Ten. You can find us there. Ask us questions if you've got them. Reach out to us on Twitter. We would love to answer your questions about this program. I think it's a really interesting time to take some of those questions too. But that'll do it for this week. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.
Beyond the Big Ten is a network of podcasts that aims to be your go-to resource for all things Big Ten. We cover the entire conference with shows hosted by ex-players and athletic alumni, aiming to be your go-to source of information and entertainment for your favorite team. Hosted by ex-Big Ten players, media, and insiders, our podcasts are focused on giving diehard fans and those alums an inside scoop about the teams and people that make the Big Ten Conference one of the most watched and most talked about conferences in sports. We're excited to talk Big Ten basketball with you wherever you may be. Subscribe now.